Hey, this is going to be a video about how I make a song. And unlike, I suspect, a lot of other videos that people make about this, I haven't made the song yet. I've started writing it. So the song might be bad. We might abandon it. But that's part of the process too. I just thought it'd be fun to try to document what I do when I'm going through making a song. So we're starting at step one. I've written about half a song. And the way I normally do that, as opposed to sitting down and writing on a piece of paper, is I normally keep a running list of various notes on my phone of just phrases I think are interesting or stuff that I want to put into a song, and then kind of stitch that together. Maybe my songs would be better if I were a little bit more focused about just picking a topic and writing it, but that's generally not how I do it. Probably about 75-80% of the time it's kind of like fragments that come together and I start to recognize commonalities and bring that into one package. So that's what I've got right now, is I've kind of taken some of those fragments and put them into about, 2 verses, a pre-chorus and a chorus. And kind of then what I do is I've sort of already, picked out a basic chord progression, which normally the way I write is I do the classic like G, C, E minor chord shapes and just capo to find where I want to sing it. And then at that point I'll kind of get the strum pattern down and decide how fast I want it to be, and that's kind of the first step of getting it into the computer. Is I'll identify that strum pattern and get the tempo right, and that'll be the first thing I do. So this is kind of like the fragment that I have ready to go, just to show you an idea of like where I'm at when I start to bring it into the computer. So here's kind of the chorus of what I'm thinking. I think I might be doing too much, might not be doing enough. If I break it into pieces, I'll be picking them up. And when you say I'm not important, I'll be calling you bluff. Life isn't perfect, but I think that's enough. And then so it's messy or whatever, but the strum pattern that's going to come out of that is like. Alright, so I settled on a tempo of 101, and for the faster chorus I'm going to be changing chords on 1 and 3 to where the verses, the slower parts, can change on every one beat. And so I just messed with my pedals, kind of got the tone that I roughly want to go for, and then I'm just going to record into Logic and get that down. Probably this won't be the final guitar track, although sometimes I do end up using the sketch track. But this is mostly just to get the idea in there so we can start arranging everything and then re-record the stuff that sounds bad later down the line. So yeah, let's get it in there. All right, that's good enough. I'm gonna correct the timing in Logic to where everything is nicely on beat, and then we can continue building from there. So a big part of making music in general, at least for me, if you don't have super sophisticated technology or whatever, is manually aligning stuff to the tempo. So obviously it helps the closer I can play it to where it's supposed to be, but pretty much every guitar track I'm coming in here and doing what you're seeing on the screen, which is finding all the transients and putting them right where they need to be. I'm usually a little looser with the second guitar track because I think I mentioned earlier, or will mention in the future, that they don't have to align correctly, and it actually sounds a little bit better if they don't. But I'm cutting out a lot of doing this throughout this video. I recorded that track in, but stuff always goes wrong. I recorded it at first and it sounded really bad, and I realized that I was recording the microphone, which is over here, instead of recording the direct input through the amp. So I switched that over, recorded it through the amp, and it sounded even worse. There was like a really buzzy sound, which has been going on for a while. This is the worst it's ever been. So I figured I can't really record through the amp because I can't figure out what's making that noise. I've replaced cables and everything. So the cord is just going directly into the little interface that I use to record, and I'll show you that real quick. So directly into that red thing, and then that goes directly into the computer. So there's still a little bit of a buzz, but not nearly as bad, which makes me think it's coming from the amp. So anyway, got the first guitar track in there and aligned it to the grid. And so another thing I always do when I'm recording guitars is I do 2 takes, and I normally align those together and pan one of them to the left and one of them to the right. It just gives kind of a nice stereo effect, as opposed to just recording one track and kind of spreading it. It's nice to have, I think it's nice to have 2 separate takes that are panned. So now I'm going to record that second guitar track, align that to the grid and pan it, and then we'll have really the backbone of the song. Just those 2 guitar tracks, you can see them panned left and right, and here's kind of what they sound like if you got headphones on, or if you got speakers you can hear the panning. Got that second track in there. I don't love the timing, but I think I'll probably record at least one of those again. I don't mind when they're a little bit out of phase because I think it enhances the stereo effect, but something about that, especially in the very first chord, kind of sounds off to me. But it's not a big deal right now. I'll fix it later. And now that we got that chorus kind of recorded, I'm gonna try to record something for the verses, and maybe I'll get something in there for the pre-chorus, maybe not. We can maybe build the skeleton of the song without that in there if I don't really know what chords we're gonna want. But I'll just record some other stuff, similar chords in halftime, maybe some finger picking, and then we can use that to build the song, and then we'll put lyrics and drums over it. You maybe noticed that I have not touched drums yet. I'm just recording to a metronome. That's another thing that I always do, is pretty much do the guitar first. And again, maybe my songs would be better and more rhythmic if I started with the drums, but that's just not how I do it. I write the songs on guitar and put it in the computer on guitar first. So yeah, let's get some verse guitar in there. And then one more thing that I think I'm going to want is a little bit of a build before, kind of between the pre-chorus and the chorus. So it's just going to be one chord kind of building, but I'll record that now just so I have it, because I know that's something I'm going to want when I build the song. So we'll get that, 2 takes of that in there as well. First one. Alright, now I gotta align those all to the grid, and we'll start putting them in place. So I recorded all those parts that I was talking about. One mistake I made after I started stitching them together was I realized that the verse kind of strum pattern that I recorded doesn't work with just the rhythm of the lyrics that I've already written. So here's kind of what I just put in there, not thinking, for the chords. That's fine, it's alright, but when I just sort of started humming what I was thinking the melody was going to be over that, it doesn't fit at all. Kind of the accents go in the wrong spot. So I've just been kind of noodling around on the guitar and trying to figure out what the strum pattern should be for the verses. It's kind of like to the sky or frozen ground, the same 3 chords on my guitar. So it almost seems like maybe those don't want to be halftime at all, or maybe it just wants to be, an exact halftime replica of what the strum pattern was for the chorus. So I'm going to record a few variations of that and see if it works better with the melody. I tried a couple different things, and I think what I liked best is just a sort of pared back version of the chorus drum, but it's in the same, really the same time, not halftime like I thought it was originally going to be. So I could have chose a tempo twice as much as it is now. We're just now going to be pretty much always changing chords on the 3. But that's all right, whatever, doesn't matter that much. So I'm going to record the second version of that verse strum. So just a little softer, a little quieter, but same vibe. And then we'll still have like the pre-chorus, and maybe there'll be a bridge. Maybe I'll write a bridge later. We'll see. And I guess one thing I didn't really mention is I'm putting this all into Logic before I have, you know, the last 25% of the song written. Because of stuff like this, where like I feel like I'm a lot of times trying to cram lyrics into, I don't know, whatever making them go together, making the verse and chorus like kind of vibe together. So it's kind of nice to have the chords for the verse worked out before, have that, you know, lyrics for the first one or maybe the second one written, and then I can know the framework I'm operating in and write the last part of the song. I don't know, and sometimes I feel like it helps to hear it all together, to know like what the rest of it wants to be, because as it is right now, I'm not, you know, feeling super sure about what the second verse or third verse, whatever it may be, wants to feel like. So yeah, I like that version of the verse drum a lot better. Now I've started to arrange everything into the order that it's going to go, at least the parts that I have written. And so I'll show what I've got in Logic in just a minute. But kind of what I'm doing at this point is putting all those parts together. You know, they don't flow very well together because they're recorded like, you know, different dynamics and stuff like that, and that's why I'll re-record some of it later. But what I'm doing now is just sort of humming or singing the lyrics over this arrangement, figuring out where like maybe a certain chord wants to extend, or we want to skip a certain chord because it doesn't work with the melody, stuff like that, just to kind of get all the arrangement pieces the way they're going to go. And once that's done, I can start putting down the scratch vocals and then coming up with a drum pattern for the song. Open beams far, awful shots of the sky or frozen ground, made the same 3 chords on my guitar, waiting for a tragedy to organize my life around. I'm starting to let myself hope will never come. Yeah, and so I think we want a little bit more of the verse before that sort of arpeggio comes in, and that arpeggio is going to be for just 2 lines that we have leading into the chorus. So I got the verse strummed to like the length we needed it for the lyrics that had already been written. And then I started to put that little arpeggio in, which I kind of like how it sounded, but when I sung the pre-chorus over it, just the picking pattern and the chords aren't quite right. So I'm going to re-record that little arpeggio. But what I am going to do is keep the old one in case I want to use it for something else later in the song. It's just not quite right for what I originally intended it for. So I'm going to record that new guy now with different chords and see if that fits a little better into the flow of what I was going to sing over it. That wasn't the right chords either. Let's try that again. That's why I'm messing it up, is turn the metronome off to listen to how nice the stereo effect was. we'll record 2 of those, put it in there, and see how it goes. So that arpeggio is a little bit better. I think it's still probably not going to be the final one. So I think we need to get some vocals in there, and that'll maybe help me decide what to do with that little portion of the song. I mentioned earlier that some of those scratch vocals or scratch guitar tracks might make it into the final song. There's absolutely no chance that the scratch vocal is going to make it into the final song. The point of this is just to figure out the timing and maybe some melody ideas, and all the vocals are going to get re-recorded probably near the end, and I always have, you know, a bunch of different layers of vocals because I don't really know what I'm doing, and the only way I can get like a reasonably full sound is to do a bunch of doubled vocals, largely of the same melody, not even harmonies, and kind of stack all those together, align them, and then use that as the main vocal melody. So what I'm going to do right now is just sing everything all the way through once, and I'll then mess with the timing and pitch correct a bunch of stuff in Logic. That way I have that as a reference when I go to record my actual vocals later on in the process. And then I keep on mentioning I haven't even finished writing the song yet. That's fine, I'll do this process again later, and probably won't even show because it'll be the same thing. I'm just recording a scratch vocal as kind of a reference once the rest of the song is all arranged. Artful shots of the sky or frozen ground, the same 3 chords on my guitar, waiting for a tragedy to organize my life around. Just like for the guitar track, I'll do a little bit of flex time on the reference vocal to make sure it's roughly where it wants to be. It doesn't have to be perfect because when I record the real vocals, I'll kind of like naturally fix that once I hear where it needs to go. But what I also do for the reference track is turn on flex pitch, as you see here, which is, I guess, sort of auto-tune, not as sophisticated. But you can see I'm just going to select all of the notes that it's identified and pitch correct those 100 because we're not going to use this track in the end. It doesn't matter if it sounds a little bit weird. This is just for kind of giving me something to try to sing to. And here I'm trying to decide what key it's in, and I'm counting up frets to finally determine that it's in C sharp major, and that's what I need to set the scale quantized to. It's all been B-roll so far. I don't do a lot of EQing as I go, but the one thing that I do kind of mess with right away is the reference vocal. People say that you're not supposed to boost frequencies, you're only supposed to cut them, but I always feel like the vocals are too quiet, so I don't follow that advice, and I always boost that kind of blue range that you see there, and then cut some of the lower frequencies. And then I'll also throw on a de-esser, which we'll see later in the video actually sounds pretty bad, so I need to change the settings for the de-esser. And then I'll also just throw some compression on there just to make it sound a little bit less raw when I'm trying to reference that for the final vocals that we'll record later. And next, with the scratch vocal and the scratch guitar tracks in place, it's time to put some drums on here. So I would normally just tap those out on the device you're going to see, or on a little keyboard/drum pad that we'll get to probably in a later video. I'm feeling alright about the first pass for drums. I think they're probably a little bit too heavy for the verse. So I'll record some like hats and stuff instead of what I put down to begin with. And I always do a lot of drum editing in Logic because I'm not very good at just tapping it out and getting it right. So I'll like do a bunch of weird stuff and then choose, the one measure that actually sounds good, and then modify that in Logic to sound reasonably like drums. So that's kind of the three main parts down. And so this has all been one day, as you can probably tell by the lighting, just getting the rough ideas into Logic. And then I'll kind of fine tune the arrangement, and then it'll be time really to write the rest of the song. And then I'll get the scratch vocal for that in there. And then I'll start building out like keyboards and synths, anything like that we want to add in. And then it'll get into the process of really like recording the final parts and making it into something that sounds good, as opposed to just at this point, which it sounds all right, but it's mostly an idea, just a framework of what the song is going to be. Here's an example of the aforementioned drum editing. There will be a lot of this that doesn't make it into the video because it's boring and tedious, and it takes a lot for me to get to reasonable sounding drums. As I mentioned, the raw stuff coming out of the sample pad is usually pretty gnarly because I don't typically do a good job with drumming with the drumsticks. So I'll continue to do this throughout the project, and like the rest of the video you just won't see it because it's basically the same thing of like making minute changes to certain hits and altering the velocity a little bit and trying to make it sound good and figure out what works with the guitar. I think that's part of just the process of starting with the guitar and then building the drums around it, as opposed to vice versa, is I don't really think about like, well, what would be a good rhythm? I try to think about like what is going to enhance the stuff that I sort of care about to begin with. So it's just a little bit of a backwards process in that way. So I kept working on the arrangement. I think it's feeling pretty good, except for kind of the way it bleeds into the chorus. It doesn't quite have a smooth transition up into that high energy portion, kind of right here. So I think if I can figure out how that can flow a little bit smoother, I think we're doing pretty well. I was able to write the second verse, and I think it actually flows a lot better than the first verse did, because I already had that stuff in place. Basically freestyled it like Jay-Z. This is great. So I think if I can work out that pre-chorus transition, then we're going to be ready to move into more instrumentation. You're a radar detector, I'm an actor turned director.